Hello, good morning, good afternoon.
Let's go. Well, thank you for all for joining. We're really excited to share with you essentially what we've learned during the last quest, and we've invited some participants that you'll be able to hear from, hear about their experience, hear about how they've discovered new stuff about strategizing in the context of this fictitious version of IKEA. And we also want at the same time to give you some insights that we've collected, that we've gathered by doing 5 sessions exploring how do you strategize. So, Steve, why don't you start with the first story?
Yeah, so I just want to start by telling a little bit about, well, a few years ago when I was in charge of innovation at a big global company. So the company at the time had what seemed like a crystal clear strategy, and it was communicated everywhere, and it was simply to become the most digital company in our industry. And so we saw this on slides, it was in all the town halls, it was printed on posters across offices, it was shared with the press, with the media, and everyone knew this strategy to become the most digital company off by heart. But here's what actually happened when we tried to work with it. So one of our teams would develop a new digital concept, so something like an AI tool or a blockchain solution or even a mobile app. And so we'd have to ask ourselves, is this idea strategically aligned with the company? And so we'd stare at this strategy statement and we'd realize, well, actually we have no idea. What does most digital mean? And does it mean that we need to prioritize the flashiest technology, or is it the one that's going to generate the most data? And well, what did we do with the more old school technology solutions that actually produced real value, tangible value for customers, but maybe weren't seen as the most cutting edge tech solutions? And so the more we try to use this strategy as a decision making filter, actually, the more confused we got by it. So we had this strategy, a so-called strategy that gave the illusion of clarity, but in practice, it gave us, well, zero guidance. So when we needed to make real concrete choices about where to invest time, money, talent, and that really got me thinking about the difference between having a strategy and having a useful strategy and one that you can execute. And quite frankly, if you can't execute it, maybe it's not really a strategy at all. So that's very much what we want to talk about today. And the first question is, when is a strategy not a strategy? And maybe just before we go into this, do you all have access to the chat here in Teams? Yeah, it should be open to all of you. So we're going to play a little game. It's called Guess Whose Strategy. So we're going to show you 3 examples of company strategies. And we're going to see if you can guess which company each one belonged to. So we're going to ask you to drop in the chat the name of the company. And I'm fairly certain you've heard of all 3 companies. And so this is the first one. Elevate the world's consciousness. Maybe, Matthew, you can read out some of the most promising responses.
We are getting Headspace from Marta. Headspace, the mindfulness company. We have Meta from Alex.
I was wrong. I actually, even though I can see the chat, I can't type into it for some reason. It says chat is only available during the meeting. So.
Oh, I think we have a Roman blocker filter or something. Let me try to remove it.
But feel free to shout out, Roman, if you've got a different idea.
I don't know, better help.
Neuralink from Felix.
And Marta, well done. It's WeWork. Yeah. So they had this soaring vision to elevate the world's consciousness, and they managed to elevate their own valuation actually to nearly $50 billion at one point. But the fact they had no real policy absolutely killed their growth. So they expanded without any kind of guardrails over costs and margin, etc. Well, what they did, which is brilliant in retrospect, is that they positioned themselves as a tech company. But as we all know, it was essentially just a real estate company, subleasing business real estate with well, negative unit economics overall. So they were losing money on each location, but they had this idea that they could somehow achieve profitability through scale. So that never materialized because they simply didn't have a guiding policy on how this would actually materialize. So it got to 2019, WeWork filed for their IPO, and then investors finally got the chance to scrutinize the financials and the governance structure. They were all horrified. And so WeWork had to withdraw their IPO, and the company lost something like $40 billion in valuation pretty much overnight. So sad story there. The next one is make healthy juice effortless. Maybe a bit easier if you know the one. Yeah, I see it. Dave got that in one. Well done, Dave. Yep. This is Juicero. So this was their mission, right? To make healthy juice effortless. It sounded very inspiring, but actually it was just a list of product goals that they had. So they took a very simple problem to make fresh juice, and they created this absurdly over-engineered, expensive solution that customers could very easily circumvent. Famously, you could just take the pouches, squeeze them, and you didn't need this $700 machine. What was interesting is that Juicero had these very detailed roadmaps, and they hit all their engineering milestones on time. They hit all their manufacturing targets. So they delivered exactly what was planned. And the machine worked as designed. So by all of their internal metrics, they were absolutely crushing it or squeezing it, if you forgive the pun. But what they absolutely failed to diagnose was some of the critical realities. And these things would have killed the project right from the very start. So the fact they were competing against much cheaper, much faster solutions. The fact that customers don't actually want Wi-Fi and apps and subscription management on a juicer, and also that the affluent, health-conscious customers they were targeting are actually quite skeptical about being overcharged for something that they don't need. So they launched the product. It cost $700. They sold almost none, and they closed the company down within 15 months. So another strategy that didn't work out. And then the final one. This was the 2.0 plan in 2011 on how to fix profitability in a very concise 124 pages.
That's probably a trickier company to guess. Yeah, go for it, Roman.
You've definitely all heard of it, but it might be a hard one to guess. Yeah.
Meta, but maybe I don't know. I mean, they weren't very profitable back then.
McKinsey, that's a good guess.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Obviously led by the 124 pages. Anyone want to hazard a?
Amazon, maybe.
Amazon.
Bezos loves long memos.
Dell?
I think. Well, you're probably the closest there with Dell. So it was actually HP. So they circulated this great big real plan, this fixed profitability strategy. But as it happened, it just sat in people's inboxes, mostly unread, untouched. So they actually had a pretty good diagnosis in retrospect of all the problems that they were facing. So issues with organizational complexity, cost structure problems, market positioning. So they'd analyzed this clearly very well in their 124 pages. But again, they had no real guiding policy. So it just sat in people's inboxes. So it showed there was no real commitment from the leadership to this new plan. And there was no understanding of the priorities. And there weren't any clear choices about where to focus and what would the framework be for making decisions going forward. So without any kind of coherent policy, it was obviously impossible to take any coherent actions. And as a result, it meant there was no accountability, growth simply stayed flat, and margins declined further. Now, finally, in 2020, so it took them 9 years, they did finally start to see some signs that this strategy was paying off. But it makes you wonder how many other businesses could have survived 9 years without a real strategy. So they did okay in the end, but clearly not the way to go. So thank you for participating, and well done for guessing 2 out of the 3 correctly. Okay, Mathieu, over to you.
Yeah, so one thing that we've explored and that is always making us chuckle is the challenges around setting up a proper strategy at a corporate level. And we've realized that it gets really hard, and we've seen some patterns going on, and typically we've realized that when you start having a vision that is complex, that can't really be explained in 2 or 3 sentences, and for which you need 124 slides, maybe there's something going on here. The other one is when the managers in conversations are giving conflicting descriptions of company or department priorities, and they don't necessarily know how they articulate with each other. The third one that we've seen happening frequently is not having clarity around how to achieve the goal. So we have that bold vision, but there is not really a pathway to get there. The fourth one is the feeling that everything's a priority, because that vague strategy, that vague vision is so empowering that overall we're meant to just go and burst in all sorts of directions, and that's becoming super counterintuitive. The fifth one, and that's always a fascinating one, when we go and visit some typically new innovation space at traditional organizations, is the idea of having aspirational keywords printed on the walls of the coffee space or the toilet sometimes, as if they were meant to evoke something bigger than the employees walking the floors. But that doesn't translate into anything that's tangible or meaningful. And the sixth one is, of course, the fact that budget doesn't really back or support the initiatives, the vision, or the strategy. In fact, there is a quote that at a simpler level says, well, if I want to understand how you are actually prioritizing things, show me your calendar and I'll see how you're really spending your time. And that's going to tell me what's important for you. Well, there is the similar approach with budgeting. Now, why is it a problem when we're getting strategy being a hot mess at the company level, but of course at a department or a team level? Well, of course, you have the classic of misallocation of capital, the fact that talents eventually start turning over. You're struggling to just find that purpose that drives you when things get harder. But you tend to realize also that at an organizational level, you're missing momentum in a world that's obviously going faster and faster. And so many more that I'm sure you can think of. Now, when we've started exploring this topic with Strategy Quest, we've realized that there is a wonderful book. Next slide, please, Steve. That's explaining or pointing at how to make a great strategy. And it starts by expliciting what strategy is not. And it's not just a vision. It's not a mission statement. It's not just a long list of goals or a big PowerPoint deck. It's not also strategy layering, where you're trying to kind of come up with the team, then the department, then the company, and it's all meant to make sense. There is actually a straightforward kernel. So it comes from the book Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, which I really recommend to have a look at. And it starts with the idea of having a diagnosis, a clear definition of the challenges at hand. Then you have guiding policies, which are typically your overall approach to dealing with the challenge or the challenges. And then you have coherent actions, which are essentially the set of specific steps that you should take to implement the guiding policies and overcome the challenges. Now, when you get one level below, you're able to put additional levels of complexity. So it's not because we've simplified making a good strategy into 3 steps that it's simple and straightforward. You can add a level of depth as you need it to. What we've noticed, though, in the context of Strategy Quest is when you take the diagnosis apart, so understanding what's going on, what are the challenges at hand, there are a bunch of assessment frameworks that you can leverage. I'm sure you're familiar with a bunch, but the SWOT, the PESTEL, the Porter's 5 Forces out there are all different frameworks that you can leverage to fine-tune your diagnosis. They don't in themselves represent your organization strategy. They are just a component that let you to really understand the challenges at hand. In a similar way, when it comes to figuring out your guiding policies, you can use different frameworks in the context of growth, which is really what we're working after at Strategy Quest. You have the hands-off matrix, which is that 2x2 matrix. You have the BCG one. You have the blue ocean strategy, which one of our team on the call employed in one of their round. You have the business model canvas, and there are some other frameworks that you can leverage. Again, in themselves, they do not make your strategy, but they support the crystallizing, the understanding of what will be your guiding policies. And then finally, you have the coherent actions. How do we actually get there? What are the critical steps to make some progresses? And you've probably heard of the lean startup, design thinking, the strategy choice cascade. And then if you're more old school, you have the waterfall approach or real-time strategic planning, which is probably a little trickier when you want to state a strategy that's meant to enable tens of thousands of people around the world to move forward. But this is essentially all the different ways that you can compose what eventually is going to be becoming the strategy. A diagnosis, guiding policy, and coherent actions. Steve, I'm passing back the mic to you so you can help us.
Yeah, and I just want to highlight really how intuitive this is, because we talk about strategy a lot in a business context, but strategy originally came from the military domain, but we talk about it as well in sports. We talk about it for those who are into video games. We have these strategy games. And the first step, which is the diagnosis, is really about understanding the real enemy. So whichever way suits you. Are we talking about video games here? Are we talking about military? Are we talking about business? You're looking for the challenges out there. Who's coming to get you? Who's after your piece of the pie or your resources, or who's preventing you from achieving what you want to achieve? Understanding that, of course, is the diagnosis part. And then it's about declaring your battle plan. So in broad strokes terms, like, where are we going to go? What are the big guiding policies that we're going to bring in here to direct our success? And then we translate into execution and action. So how do we go out, that sports strategy overall, how does that translate into tactics and action? And I think that's one of the things I really love about this simple 3-step framework is, like Mathieu said, it's not simplistic because there's a lot of work behind the scenes that has to go into it. But it's a great filter that if you don't have each of these 3 things, then something is fundamentally missing from any strategy you're trying to share. And just the definition there, if you like. So good strategy is a coherent action backed up by an argument. So it's an effective mixture of thought and action with a basic underlying structure. So this kernel of those 3 points. So let's get into execution a bit more. Now, of course, even if we agree on the principles that we just discussed, the question now arises of, well, how do we put all of this into practice? So with strategy, it's not a case of learning it once and you're immediately competent. I mean, you can read all the books, you can follow all the courses. But if we think of, say, an airline pilot, so no airline would ever let a pilot fly a plane without hundreds of hours or thousands of hours in a flight simulator. Now, a simulator is where pilots practice. They can crash in a simulator, and we know that it doesn't matter because pilots learn and they get gradually better at flying through this practice. But if you're a business leader, where do you go to get practice in terms of business strategy? Because you don't want to crash a real business, right? This was very much the motivation for us to launch Strategy Quest. So we see it as a business simulator, and as a simulator that reflects to some extent the complexity and the uncertainty that we see in the real business world. So we're going to show you now some of the challenging situations that we put our participants through. Of course, some of you have witnessed this for yourselves, but for those of you who haven't yet been through Strategy Quest, we want to give you at least a taster of what the experience feels like. And going back to this diagnosis, so we throw so much information at the participants. Mathieu will tell you more in a minute through the different formats, etc. But essentially, you have to diagnose based on a huge amount of information, lots of it conflicting, contradictory, lots of it ambiguous, and simply too much volume coming at you all at once. And that's really the challenge of this first step. But then you have to craft policies. So you have to take all of this noise, all of this mess, somehow make some sense out of it and channel it into a coherent policy or set of policies towards your objective. And then once you've made some semblance of saying, well, you know, we think we know what our policy is going to be, you then have to translate that into actions, and not 17 different actions, but ideally just a small number of very impactful actions that you can take. So Mathieu, maybe you can tell us a bit more about what all this chaos looks like straight off the bat.
So yeah, we've tried to create something that feels as close to the reality as possible, because we're really after building muscles. I think we've all experienced in countless times how theoretically all of these things sound amazing, but as soon as you're being thrown into a new department that you're meant to lead, then you're suddenly losing some control of what's actually meant to happen, and you're forgetting your own best practices, and it can get a little frustrating at times. So we've tried to create an environment that is all fictitious, all run with agents in the background, or not so much in the background, but where you're able to get a glimpse at what's the real thing going to be, so that you can prepare some muscle. So we've created a simple interface where you have access to briefings. Think of your research reports that come from the industry, that are about the competition, that refers to some macro events. You also have access to a team inbox that very quickly gets overwhelmingly busy with a ton of information around what the senior stakeholders, the senior management is saying, about what the media might be trying to extract from you, about some movements in the market, so that you get a real feel of what it means to be in a leadership position and have to read between the noise. What are the signals that are meaningful or not? And this is something that we've created in a straightforward way. You have access to an inbox overwhelmed with a ton of information. And there is also a set of interfaces where you have access to lists of competitors, of different ecosystem players, essentially, that are all part of this world and that may impact or interact with you according to the journey that you're taking from one session to the other. And what we've done is creating a level of insights about each of these agents in a way that reflects the company's understanding of them. It means that some information is erroneous, some information might be limited, but it's all meant to represent what happens when you're actually leading a department or a team, and that you're having access to an organization's kind of institutional knowledge. So that's the first part. And as a team, you're meant to kind of go from one screen to the other and figure out, okay, what's helpful to me, what's meaningful. Then you go on and think about your guiding policies. And we are creating some tools. Steve, if you can please move to the next slide. We're creating a set of tools where you get to engage with the different stakeholders, to ask them questions, to try to explore and understand their perspective, and see, based on your initial assumptions, how that would resonate internally. We're also giving access to something that Steve is going to showcase that worked in some cases and could have been improved in some others, but we've had some fun with creating, with enabling participants to have live conversations with some of our voice agents that have some specific background insights. And the idea, before I give you the mic, Steve, was that the participants were in a position where they were able to identify the right guiding policies based on what's happening in the platform, but we never limited them into exploring what's shared in business books. We encourage them to explore cutting-edge AI tools in a way that would also provide some additional benefits. We encourage them to explore the 3 M's, the Mural, Microsoft whiteboards, or essentially ways to brainstorm together as a team and figure out what's the right angle. And of course, you can't find the right guiding policies unless you have conversations, because it's such a critical part of strategy that we encouraged people to have debates among themselves. But Steve, why don't you show us how it looked like to how it sounded?
Sure. And I think this really is one of the highlights of Strategy Quest, is these live interactions with agents. So let me show you straight away. Here we go. So you should be able to see this now. So I'm going to kick off this conversation with Quinta Consigliera. And so she is an AI agent and she's an advisor. So she's not a stakeholder in the sense of some of the others, but she's here to help the team with their thinking and with their decision making. So let me just bring up this conversation now. Hi, Quinta. It's Steve here. Hope you're well. I'm calling because the team and I have been discussing a new approach. So you might know Björn, the CEO, wants us to focus more on customizable customizable furniture in the near future. But we got an email from Joe, who's the VP of retail. He said that profitability on items like these is quite poor. There's also no evidence that competitors are having any success in this area. So customization sounds really good in principle, but it doesn't look promising commercially. Can you tell us what you think?
Hello, Steve. It's good to hear from you. I understand the situation you're facing with conflicting views on the customizable furniture initiative. It's certainly a common challenge when balancing strategic vision with commercial realities and market evidence. To provide the best advice, I'd need to delve deeper into the specifics of both the potential market opportunity and the profitability concerns Joe raised.
Okay, well, here's what we want to propose. I'm proposing that we push back on the CEO's request. I think we should maintain our focus from last year, which is to expand our range of premium priced, low carbon footprint home and garden products. So we're planning to allocate 90% of our budget to these activities, but we're also going to hire an external agency. You might know Igniteco. We're going to ask them to do some customer exploration work around the theme of customization, because we want to keep this option open just in case Björn is right and this takes off in a couple of years. So what are your thoughts on this strategy?
Steve, your proposal is well considered, balancing immediate profitability concerns with a forward-looking approach to potential market shifts. Allocating the majority of your budget to a proven area while exploring customization through Igniteco seems a prudent way to de-risk the CEO's vision. My main thoughts revolve around how you plan to present this strategy to Björn to ensure his buy-in, and what specific metrics or insights you expect from Igniteco's exploration to inform future decisions.
Okay, that's great. Well, I think we can follow this up by email. Thanks a lot for your help, Quinta.
You are most welcome, Steve. I am glad I could assist. Please feel free to reach out again if you need anything else. Have a great day.
Thanks, bye. And there we go. So
Yeah.
sorry about the sound glitch there, but you could hear, right, the response, the way it was picking up on the context, and the speed at which this was executed.
These agents, they are meant to be built on your own team's context and what's going on in the world, as per the session in which you are. And we're seeing this as a great opportunity for anybody to practice talking about strategy and practicing talking with senior stakeholders and figuring out the right approach of describing some ideas or just positioning themselves, which is, of course, as you all know, a critical component of just working in a large company. And then the next screen, Steve, please. Yeah, the idea of finding your coherent actions. So this is something that we're exploring and want to intensify over the next quest. But there is this idea that as you're heading a department, and in the context of the past cohort, it was the innovation department at the fictitious version of Aeki, we want you to be enabled to take actions. So you're submitting your deliverables, but you're also able to email stakeholders to push your own strategy or your own agenda. You're able to work with your growth projects and they come up with asks. It's up to you to decide whether or not you want to kind of follow on or just kind of let them live their own life. And that makes for fascinating practicing environment, because of course you can't spend forever in between rounds. You have a limited number of time, a limited amount of attention as well. So how do you prioritize and how do you take key actions that will truly move the needle? And if you're not happy, you have another round coming up soon where you can change your approach and iterate and again build that strategical muscle that we find to be so important. And then a few things that we're having in mind for the next quest that I find just super cool and hilarious. The first one is the idea of testing one of your growth projects at a store or at a warehouse, and what would it mean concretely to talk and interact with a frontline staff or a manager, and having those kind of conversations and try to understand how's the market from the ground up. Another one that could be a ton of fun is reaching out to a competitor and see if they are willing to partner up and work with you, if they can give you any insights whatsoever. And then the third one that I found also super cool is the idea of plotting against someone, because of course, some amount of strategizing at companies is of course white hat, but some stuff can be a little on the red line, and we want to enable that for teams that really feel courageous and having kind of a pirate mindset. So again, our approach is to enable participants to create that strategical thinking muscle and go through the steps about 4 to 5 times in the course of a strategy quest, and have different engaging features to make that as crystal clear and empowering as possible. Steve, next slide, please.
Yeah, so I just wanted to highlight a few of the things that some of the teams did really well. And obviously that's testament to our early adopter group of participants, many of whom are professional innovators, professional strategists, and a few things worked fantastically well. So most of the teams, and one in particular who's here today, laid down some really good foundations before going to request more budget. And I think that was very much in the intuition of the teams, and it was reflected through the outcomes that we saw in Strategy Quest, that thinking about the culture, thinking about the governance, thinking about the human interactions within the company, even though it's a fictitious company, thinking about these things really made a big difference. And then the second one was, it gave you the opportunity to be really bold. Now, remember what I was saying earlier about the analogy with a flight simulator. So you can push this to the limit. Mathieu and I have tested it. We've managed to get fired in the past. So you can go really, really far, and you can just play it again. So it works great if you've got this boldness in vision and you're willing to put in the effort, be courageous, but also to bring together all the different stakeholders and execute on your bold vision. And then a third one was something that paid off really well, was the teams who invested in operational discipline, financial management, being quite rigorous about their numbers. Now, just to be clear, this doesn't require spending hours in Excel and fiddling with macros. So it's not that level of complexity, but just being on top of your numbers and disciplined about how you execute, that worked really well in terms of the outcomes. And then there are a few areas where all the teams struggled to some extent. One was quite interesting, and we only really learned this ourselves through executing the strategy quest. And we've referred to this as the integration paradox, and the fact that the more successful your innovation initiatives are, the more internal complexity you create. So it's fantastic that you've got this healthy portfolio with ventures coming in, coming out, and you've got teams, employees, external agencies all working for you and producing fantastic results. But you've got now all this extra complexity to manage. So you end up pulling your hair out trying to keep on top of this. So the more successful you are in the earlier rounds, the harder it then becomes in the later rounds to keep on top of this. And then a very familiar one, which we've seen for decades already, we see it today, and certainly in our simulation, we see that well into the future. Despite the advances of AI and agents and automations, hiring and retaining great innovation talent does seem to be like that will be a challenge for many, many years to come, and that was very much reflected in this simulation. So I'd love to give the voice to some of our teams. So maybe just bringing up this little framework again, just to kind of guide the discussion a little bit, but without wishing to limit you. Now, I'd love it if, Joyce, you could come on the mic. And if you're willing to share your camera, that's much appreciated as well. But I'd love to ask you a couple of questions about your experience.
Sure, I think I'm on both. And Dave, my teammate, is here as well.
Yeah, great. Well, I'll start with you, Joyce, if that's okay, and then I'll bring in Dave in just a sec. So you were both in Team Apollo, and through your wise decisions and execution, you were dubbed to the strategists by our machine. So I'm curious, Joyce, what did you initially think the challenge was with Strategy Quest, and how did your understanding evolve throughout the rounds?
That's such a great question. I think we were looking, or I'll just speak for myself, really tactically. Like we had this budget that we needed to build, and then there was just all of this information that was coming in. And so, like, how did we orient? And I would say at first it was around relationships and sensing from all of the emails, trying to get a sense of what is happening in the organization. And that's like how I think we started to diagnose. But then moving over into really like that market analysis, what's happening in the industry, like where are competitors? And I think that helped us think more about the frameworks that you mentioned in the very first part of today's conversation to start to really kind of sense make and ground in the reality of what the business was doing. So I'd say orientation in the beginning was and how we were going to play the game was around like really being collaborative, but there was so much noise in kind of that inbox that we really stepped out to say what's happening with the business here, and then how do we want to define the strategy going forward.
And you mentioned a few of the frameworks, and what was it, frameworks, or was it something else that helped you to decide what actually not to focus on? So how did you figure out how to prioritize, and how did you agree together on what to ignore from all of this chaos?
Some stern direction from Alex and Quinta helped us to kind of really guide back in. But I think it was, at first we were so enamored with the game itself and the platform. And then we went back to the roots of being futurists and strategists and then trying to sense make. And so I would say it probably took 2 rounds to really feel like we had our like some foundation to where we were able to decide what worked in terms of anchoring to a market, anchoring to some of do we want to be bold and go with mergers, joint ventures? How are we engaging as a culture within the culture and tying back things to the mission? So it really did take us, I would say, that messy beginning into round 2.5
Yeah.
to really reframe what was happening and then start to move into really defining the strategy and having the North Star.
Yeah, because we've often asked ourselves the questions of could it be condensed into a shorter time frame, fewer rounds, etc. But I think from what you're saying and what we've heard from others as well, that you don't get that same learning. I think you need those iterations to really get that.
Exactly.
Great. Well, thanks a lot, Joyce. Dave, I'd love to bring you in as well. So Joyce's teammate, of course, from Team Apollo. Are you on the mic, Dave?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah. Hi, Dave. Hey. I'm curious to know from you how did crafting a clear guiding policy, if you referred to it in that way, how did it influence the decisions that you made later in the simulation?
So yeah, it's a good question. I think just building on what Joyce was saying, I think we played around with different like kind of North Star prioritizations. And then I think over time we realized we had to get even like tighter and have just a clear thesis that's going to really be our guiding force. So I think over time we actually focused our guiding policy even more. And I think if we were to do this again, it's probably something we would want to start out doing probably from like week 1 or week 2, just to really establish us. I think we really came in a stride probably by the 4th or 5th week, right towards the end, where we just were able to layer in all the different inputs that we thought mattered, from just like what the market's saying, what the internal stakeholders were telling us, what kind of new crises emerged. I think had we been able to do that, we had been able to adapt a little bit better to some of the curveballs that were thrown our way. And yeah, I think, and then also I think we were just so curious about some of these new innovation methodologies that we just wanted to try them out too at a certain point, just to see like what are the levers here, like what are going to be the trade-offs and benefits from them.
So you mentioned a couple of things you could have done differently. Hypothetically, if you were to take part in Strategy Quest again, the characters would be the same, but the storyline would be completely different. How do you think you might approach it differently a second time around?
I think we would use maybe the framework we came up with at the very end, which was just needing to simplify. So like have like a more intuitive view of like we basically went to like mission, kind of big pain point. Then we did customer segment, and then we did like what kind of lever. I think we would try practicing that more, and I think be able to pay attention to more the feedback loop of saying, okay, this week we did those choices. What's the results? What's the KPIs? And just have a tighter way of getting that kind of new data coming in and being able to know how to make adjustments. I think I found that like a really hard part of the course was balancing looking at new investments to managing your old investments and just knowing what's even being influenced, and then parsing through all the emails to get the data of like what even happened with the last thing. So I think I'd be practicing with like a master framework more, rather than shooting from the hip.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, very clear. Well, you're certainly very welcome if you'd like to have a second go. Well, thanks to both of you, Joyce and Dave.
We're already telling a bunch of people in our network in the US that this is an awesome game, and it's one of the best ways to do what you're trying to do, simulate the strategy. And Marta, I've been seeing your LinkedIn posts. I think those are very fun, that you're bringing it to life.
And in fact, I'd love to bring both Marta and Roman into the discussion next. So maybe focusing a little bit further down then in the process. So Team Athena was your team. You were dubbed the architects based on your approach, which went overall really, really well. Maybe Roman, I can start with you if you're live and on the mic. Can you hear me, Roman?
Oh, Roman had to drop, by the way, Steve.
Oh, we had to drop out. Oh, okay. Well, in that case, I'll ask the questions to Marta. So Marta, I see you're not muted. So Marta, what surprised you when you actually had to spend your team's budget, and how did you reach the allocations, considering all the different competing demands that you had from stakeholders?
So what was interesting is, first of all, that we had all this money, which was the joy of it. You had the freedom, and therefore you could experiment. So I think that the first thing we went for was the logical action. Okay, where could this money bring us more revenue or more returns, and then splitting it up in different time frames. And we were also guided by the CEO's pressure to provide quick returns while keeping our eyes on the long-term strategies. And in his turn, he was influenced by the market and by lobbies. So we had to take part in this game. So then we had to branch out. Okay, we need quick returns, but we also need bigger investments that will produce more over time. So this is how we started to allocate. But then we brought in all the other levers, which was the interesting part for myself, that insofar we in a normal innovation environment, we only use a part or a subset of these levers. So we never got to even contemplate others in many cases, or we didn't have budget allocated to those. So we went for the new ones as well. So experimented with those, and what brought it all together in the end was that we could combine the budget with the lever that would bring the most return for that particular challenge. So it was all a combination and bringing it all together in a comprehensive picture.
Yeah, so like a bang for your buck type analysis then, was it, that you figured out?
Yes, so this was the financial part.
Yeah. And I'm curious if you could maybe zoom out a little bit and think about the whole experience and the bigger picture that you experience. Maybe before you took part, what made you want to take part, and then what growth or mindset shifts did you notice during the experience or as a result of the experience?
Well, I was curious, and I wanted to play a little bit and see what is achievable, and also experiment with all the AI features that I knew about. So that was the first step. What surprised me, and taking a step back and comparing it with other kind of learning environments or training courses, is that you learn by doing and you experiment at the same time, and the learning you get in this way is subconscious almost, so you don't realize you're playing and you're in a game, and you're trying to interact with the people that seem real, and you just suck in all the knowledge and all the concepts that otherwise you would read in a book or sit in front of a screen and watch a video and then probably forget. So that was a surprising thing.
That was actually going to be my last question, is if you compare it to taking other forms of learning, so whether that's online courses or training workshops or even coaching, how would you differentiate the learning opportunities versus those other types?
So for me, it's no going back. So I'm never gonna take another normal standard course after this one. Once you've seen this and experimented, you probably realize how beneficial it is to do it this way and to do it interactively. That if you have this choice, then you would probably not hesitate too much to choose it over the standard courses, for sure. At least from my side.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, when Matthew and I were first talking about this a few months ago, we saw the real opportunity being that this type of interaction, where what was often called business wargaming in the past, was prohibitively expensive for most companies. So it would take, you could hire a BCG or McKinsey to build it for you, but it would take an army of analysts and associates to prepare everything. So prepare all the scenarios and all the possible directions that your storyline can take. And then for every decision that was made, they'd have to then number crunch that and produce a logical, coherent outcome that would reflect your decision. So you can just imagine the cost involved in trying to do that with a small army of humans. But now, of course, with the power that we have of LLMs and AI agents, it's just incredible what we're able to do in an automated and very, very fast and pretty high quality way as well. Yeah. Anyway, I digress. Thanks a lot, Marta, for your input there. Very much appreciated. And maybe we're approaching the end of our time, but before we wrap up, I just wanted to give the mic to anyone who's willing. We're just really curious to hear from your perspective in your business. How is strategy changing? Like, do you see big shifts going on, maybe due to technology, but just in general, do you get the feel that strategy is being done in a good way or a bad way at your company? And do you see opportunities there? Just very curious to get your take from what you see on a day-to-day basis.
I could share something.
Sure.
I mean, I think what's interesting to me about strategy is that it's pretty poorly understood, even from people with like MBAs. And so I think the baseline on strategy is kind of low in some respects. And so I'm actually pretty hopeful that tools like this are going to help expand the baseline knowledge, that we actually can now demystify it more, give people like real practice with it, especially from people who are in ops and they just don't have that type of visibility. I think people kind of conflate and simplify like what actually is being done and how hard it is. So I think, yeah, I'm actually hopeful that we're going to see higher quality strategy and then more respect for management of like what it takes to do it. So just more air coverage to do the work.
Yeah, I very much hope you're right. Yeah.
I hope so too.
But anyone else like to take to the mic? No pressure, of course.
I'll lead into the lion's den here on that one. So
Please.
My hunch is, and this might be a bit controversial, is that the reason why I see strategy, implementation, and sort of the rigor to think it through so uneven, and then also probably so sort of poorly done in a lot of ways, is actually because of the business school ethos of the sort of MBA process to it, where it's more about stakeholder management and statistical planning against quarterly revenue and things like that, much more so than or trying to force fit everything into like a cascading OKR process, than it is really thinking about like what is the market dynamic and where do we need to position ourselves, and how do you execute in a little bit more agile way with bringing in some of that sensing. So one of the things I'm very curious about, because I agree with your point, Stephen, that if you can hire a McKinsey or an Accenture, and you can scenario plan or war game these types of activities, it can be very beneficial, but they can also be rather overwrought and they're very much removed from the reality of what happens when random presidents insert tariffs capriciously, or supply chains get messed up, or just sort of the ins and outs of it, and then the execution and how much the execution actually matters in the strategy. I think that kind of gets overlooked in what can feel like a little bit more of an academic exercise. So yeah, I mean, I'm very keen to see some of the role playing and some of the interventions and the unexpected elements, and how that applies not just to the thinking of it, but also the actual doing of it.
Yes, that's right. Well, you'll get to experience that very soon, Alex. Thanks a lot. I'll hand back to you now, Mathieu, just for some final lessons.
Ooh, really quickly. So 3 key lessons from 5 weeks of simulation. So we are still learning as well. And the big hypothesis that we had heading into this second quest was whether or not we can create a complex business environment with AI agents to help essentially our participants practice strategical thinking with some of the things that you've mentioned just now. And it felt like we can say to this yes. And this is a key learning. It was all fictitious, but it felt real. People took it seriously. Some of our teams spent easily 5 to 10 hours each on the platform trying to make sense of it all and make those decisions. And to us, that's a great learning process also for Strategic Quest as an organization that's trying to survive in this tough world. A second learning, maybe. So we've realized that this is so fun if you think about it. So a lot of our simulation is run by AI agents. So we assume that it would over-index on lots of things. We didn't assume it would over-index on talent. So the idea that the talent that you have in your fictitious innovation department is so critical just blew our mind. We've realized how it can be an enabler in so many ways, but it can also break your execution. So next time you're thinking of whatever strategy work you're doing, even if it's in the fictitious world, remember talent is key. Okay, and the third one, which is essentially a magic wand question. So 10 years ago, I wish I had known, right? So if I was suddenly dropped into the head of innovation role at the strategic level in a big organization, what did I wish to know? And this is built on what we've seen in the simulation itself. Steve, next slide, please. So a few important things. So time horizons framework. So a few things that matter. We've realized, for example, that the organization was way much more forgiving when you were starting with bold bets at the beginning. And at some point, your senior stakeholders were suddenly waking up and they were expecting you to align to business goals. And that was an interesting one. So keep that in mind. When you're heading a department, start with big, bold bets, but progressively you're going to be expected to provide opportunities for the business itself. Risk return distribution. You'll want to be careful with the amount of risk that the organization is willing to take. And that should be part of your initial assessment. Definitely adjust it to the organization. Third one is the dynamic capital allocation angle. You want to make sure that for each of your projects, you have a system of stage gating with milestones. And this is for your growth project, but also for you as an innovation department. That's something that we've seen going really well in a simulation, and that I've seen also happening pretty okay in real life. Talent orchestration, be it relying on external providers or having internal capabilities that you're nurturing. These are things that we've seen playing out really in an interesting manner in the simulation that you want to keep having in mind for the real world as well. Governance, I think that's what some of you were saying, that governance can be a time-sucking activity, but it's also so critical to make sure that you're able to make some progresses. We've seen also the concept of innovation infrastructure being very powerful in the simulation. The idea that you're building an anti-fragile network of partners and processes and activities, so that whenever there is disruption coming around you, you still have your solid foundations on top of which you can build more and more opportunities. And then the final one is the culture integration, making sure that you're figuring out different ways to involve the broader organization and that you involve them also in many ways. And that's what we want to enable for the next cohort.
Mm-hmm. Great, thanks. And just to wrap up, so just a quick preview of what's coming next. So for individual professionals who'd love to take part in the next series of Strategy Quest, we start on the 18th of September. We still have an early bird rate for the next few weeks. So by all means, sign up to that if you're interested in taking part. It'll run for 5 sessions from the 18th of September. But then, of course, for business teams, for corporates, if you see an opportunity to bring this into your company, your organization, or you know someone who really needs to bring this into their work, then please reach out to us, because we're doing calls at the moment with companies to try and design variations on the simulation. We'll send a brief email to you all just as a thank you for taking part in this webinar. We'll probably put the recording on YouTube as well, so if you'd like to go through any bits once again, then it'll be there for you to see. Great. Well, I think that concludes the webinar. Thank you so much for joining, especially to those of you who came on camera to talk a bit about your experience. Been a real pleasure having you today. And well, we look forward to connecting again with you very, very soon. All the best. Bye-bye.